Hello, welcome to our Road to Recovery Mental Health Initiative meeting for the month of September. Before we begin, I do just want to announce that we do have a trigger warning because there's mentions of physical, emotional, mental, and or sexual abuse in our topics today. All right, so welcome to Breaking the Stigma. We meet every month and we have a different topic on different various mental health struggles and things that we are all experiencing at some point in our lives. We have a medical disclaimer that I want to touch base on. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, call 911 immediately. If you are having suicidal thoughts, please call this number here. You can take a screenshot if you'd like to talk to a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area at any time. This is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you are located outside of the United States, you can call your local emergency line immediately. Today, our outline, I'm going to introduce you to our mediators, talking about what is mental health, the hotline numbers. We want to discuss that this is a safe space policy. We have that policy disclaimer here. We will have some chat and breakout rooms available if you want to talk to someone one-on-one. And this month, our topic is trigger warning. Every 68 seconds, an individual in America becomes a victim of sexual assault. Alarmingly, every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. So let's talk about it. Our guest speaker today is Allie Spurgeon, and I am so happy to have her here as her second time coming with us for Breaking the Stigma. So we're excited to have her back. All right, so what is mental health? Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It affects how we handle stress, relate to others, and how we make our choices. So mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood through adulthood. And over the course of your life, if you experience mental health problems, your thinking, mood, and behavior could be affected and can contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors such as genes or brain chemistry, life experiences such as trauma or abuse, family history of mental health problems. So these are all things that could lead to this. Our core foundational components of mental health: improve mental health understanding to reduce the stigma and promote early help seeking, a focus on athlete development and skill acquisition to help attain these goals, and access to mental health resources, screening, and feedback. So the purpose of these foundational components is to enhance awareness of the importance of athlete well-being, and this in turn addresses health and safety responsibilities towards athletes' overall well-being in the context of sports-related stressors. All right, here's some hotline numbers and a text line. We have different numbers to talk to anyone that you are looking for at any time that you need help. Please write these numbers down or screenshot if you need these. The Road to Recovery Monthly Support Group seeks to create a stigma-free zone. So we want this to be a safe space. Please be kind and mindful of others' feelings during this time, respectful of others by showing politeness and kindness. All right, the chat box is open. So you can use this time to, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box at any time if you are not comfortable coming off mute and asking on your own. If you feel like you need to have a breakout room with one of our mediators to talk to someone, then you can also put that in the chat box. All right. Trigger warning. I just want to make sure anyone who is here with us today knows that we are going to be talking about some difficult subjects and topics, so please be advised. Just like in the topic that we talked about, every 68 seconds an American is sexually assaulted. This is a number here that is specifically for the National Sexual Assault Hotline. So previously we have these suicide prevention hotlines, but I do want to make sure that everyone here sees that there is a dedicated phone number and website for people who have been experiencing sexual assault. All right, so what is sexual assault? Sexual violence is sexual activity when consent is not obtained or freely given. It is a serious public health problem in the United States that profoundly impacts lifelong health, opportunity, and well-being. Sexual violence impacts every community and affects people of all genders, sexual orientations, and ages. Anyone can experience the sexual violence, and the perpetrator of sexual violence is usually someone that the survivor knows, such as a friend, current or former intimate partner, coworker, neighbor, or family member. Sexual violence can occur in person, online, or through technology, such as posting or sharing sexual pictures of someone without their consent or non-consensual sexting. How big is this problem for children? Well, many children wait to report or never even report child sexual abuse. Therefore, the numbers below likely underestimate the true impact of the children. Although estimates vary across studies, the research shows that about 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys in the United States experience child sexual abuse. Someone known and trusted by the child or child's family members perpetrates 91% of child sexual abuse. The total lifetime economic burden of child sexual abuse in the United States in 2015 was estimated to be at least $9.3 billion. So what are the consequences here? Well, experiencing child sexual abuse can affect how a person thinks, acts, and feels over a lifetime. And this can result in short and long-term physical, mental, and behavioral health consequences. Examples of physical health consequences include sexually transmitted infections, physical injuries, chronic conditions later in life, such as heart disease, obesity, and cancer. Examples of mental health consequences include depression and PTSD symptoms. Examples of behavioral consequences include substance use or misuse, including opioid misuse, risky sexual behaviors, meaning sex with multiple partners or behaviors that could result in pregnancy or STIs, increased risk for perpetration of sexual violence, and increased risk for suicide or suicide attempts. Experiencing child sexual abuse can also increase a person's risk for future victimization. For example, recent studies have found that females exposed to child sexual abuse are at 2 to 13 times increased risk of sexual violence victimization in adulthood. People who experience child sexual abuse are at twice the risk for non-sexual intimate partner violence. So these are just some facts that we found from the CDC's website, and they're alarming, and I'm happy that we are here talking to you guys about this today and hopefully educating and helping others. And in that, I want to introduce Allie and with our topic today, and she's going to take this over, and I'm going to have her come off mute in just a moment. But first, let me introduce Cassie here. We have Cassie here with us from our Breaking the Stigma. She's a mediator here. If you need any help in the chat rooms, please type a message in there if you need any assistance. And Lori from Road to Recovery is here as well. Right. So Allie, thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your story. I know this is a really difficult topic, and it's not an easy thing to hear, and I can only imagine how difficult it is for you to be in this position, but we are so grateful for you to share your story with us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be here and bring light to something like this. And actually, if you don't mind going back like two slides, if you could share that again, if that's okay. So I think there were some really key points on there. Yeah, that one. So yeah, so those bottom facts right there. And I think this is why, this is a taboo subject. And I think that's a huge part of the problem, right? Like it's, I'll talk about why that is for me, and what I see for others too. But just like letting those facts soak in for a second, that about 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys, that's insane. Like, and then the second one, that someone known or trusted by the child or child's family member. And that was, my situation as well. It was inside my family. And so it's like totally under the radar. And I think that's what's so insane about this. And so for me to talk about it, and share my story, my intent of that is to, bring more light, some kind of ripple effect from this, to bring more light to it, right? It's not talked about, my parents didn't talk about it too. I'm one of 5 kids. Sex wasn't talked about. Something like this happening wasn't talked about. What's okay and what's not okay isn't talked about, but it's happening all the time, right? Every 68 seconds. And that third one there below those two is, it's quite the impact, right? That's pretty insane. For what it does to the human's brain and body, and the combination, the lifelong effects from having something like that. It's not just not a big deal, right? It didn't just like happen and it's whatever. It's a lifelong burden to carry. So anyways, I just wanted to go back and touch on that, because that's huge, I think. So anyways, go back to you.
All right, thank you. So take us to a little bit of your story, and you mentioned that was involved in the family, so someone that you knew, and that's very, very difficult, because you can't just cut ties with someone that you're related to very easily. You can separate yourself and distance yourself, but at the end of the day, that relation is still there, and that's a really hard thing to recover from. Can you share a little bit about maybe your support system in that moment, or who you expressed it to when it was happening? Did you have that safe person?
No, absolutely not. I didn't have a safe person. So, I think it's something I can talk about with sexual abuse and stuff, but I think there's something to be gained from my story, because it's such a normal family, right? Like my family is a family of a lot. There's 5 kids involved, and it was a mixed family, but we were just one big happy family, right? Like middle class America. And so this person that I'm going to kind of walk through my story a little bit, if that's okay, because I think my intent here of sharing that is to show that it's not just something that happens to other people, right? Like it can happen to anybody. So I was a blended family, or in a blended family at a really young age, like 2, or I think it was 3. So my parents had been divorced early on, and my mom had remarried, and there was 3 new siblings. So when I was a kid, so as long as I can remember, and there was one other boy in the family. The rest of us were girls. And that boy was, I was a tomboy as a kid. So we were like best friends. Like we rode bikes together, neighborhood, like dirt bikes, all the stuff. We were at the races together, everything. So we were like 2 peas in a pod. We did everything together. And I remember, he would go back to visit his mom over the summer in Kansas. So he'd be gone over the summer, and then he'd come back. And I remember right before he left for the summer, I was probably, 11 or 12. And I remember him really wanting to hang out with me a lot. Like he wanted me to be in his room. He wanted me to watch movies with him and stuff, and didn't want me to leave. And it was like a nice thing, but it was different. And I wasn't sure how to take that. Then he went to his mom's for the summer, and he came back, and he hated me. Like just completely, horrible, just horrible hatred towards me. And I didn't understand. So that on its own was confusing and traumatic to a young child, right? Looking back. And I remember there was like a year where he hated me. And then the next year, or maybe like 6 months later, it was a period of time where he just was constantly screaming at me and all kinds of stuff and picking fights with me. And then all of a sudden I was non-existent, like in the house, all that stuff. And he was a grade older than me in school, and he bullied me throughout school too. So he was a more popular kid, and I just kind of shut down at that point, just because I lost my best friend, and he just talked crap about me at school, right? So that super sucked. And in that period of time, I was confused, and late at night, so in the middle of the night, I remember the first time it happened. And it took me time to kind of come back to these moments, because I'd really blocked it out. We were actually in a fifth wheel in a toy hauler. So these are things that can happen at the races, right? But we were actually at a family reunion. We were in our big fifth wheel, and my parents had, my brother and I had the back garage as our bedroom, and so that was the first time it happened, and basically happened for years after that. The only times that it didn't happen was when he had a girlfriend in spurts or things like that. But he would come into my room and while I was sleeping, and touch me. And so like details would be, I'd wake up with his hand in my pants, or I'd wake up with a part of his in my hand. And what I did in those moments, I froze. I completely froze. And right before that started happening, when my brother was bullying me, we were at this family dinner at an Olive Garden, and there was a couple friends from school there, but my whole family was there. So it was at this big table. And I remember, like, they were being so mean to me that I ended up leaving. I left, and I asked for the keys from my mom, and I left, and I went and sat in the truck. And my mom ended up coming outside. My mom is like my person, like she's my girl, like to this day, she's my best friend. And I was always a mama's girl. And she came out there and she talked to me, and she said, Allie, if we need to leave this family, if this isn't good for you, then we need to leave, right? And that hit me hard. Number one, for a couple reasons. Number one, at that point, I didn't feel important in my life in any way. I didn't really have any friends. I wasn't, at home wasn't fun for me either. And, so number one, it made me feel important. It made me realize how much my mom loved me. But number two, for some reason at that age, and I've heard this from other stories, at that age, like I was 11 or 12-ish, there's like this urge to protect your family. And I've heard this like multiple, and it's weird how like a kid that age like feels that way. And so when my mom said that, she, like, bless her heart, like that was, she was doing everything she could for me. But to me, that meant, no, my mom is happy. My mom found the love of her life, like we have this big happy family. I can't screw that up. And so I shut up. Like I didn't know what to do. In my mind, I couldn't do anything. So, in those moments when he would come into my room, when I would wake up, I would remember waking up, and then I would pretend like I was waking up, and then he would leave, and then he would come back, and then he would leave, and then he would come back. And so it just happened over and over again. And so, there's those like fight, flight, or freeze, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? It's all these, nervous system responses. And I was definitely in a freeze state for myself. So that was something that I buried for so many years. My mind buried it as a protection, but my body didn't. There's so many effects that happen because of it. So I'll pause there. That's really the main, gist of what happened to me. And I share it because it's like the more the details, because it's just, if I was on the outside looking into my family, you would never guess, that would happen to a family like that, like a quality middle class family or something. But I minimized it, and I made it not a big deal. And it is a big deal. And these things should never be minimized, no matter how big or how small. So I'll pause there.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that was a really hard thing to uncover, and it took a lot of time for you to even recall some of these moments, because like you said, your mind protected yourself from that for a time. And I do want to kind of dig into that moment when you said that it took a while, to remember some of those moments. Was it through therapy, or were you having did something trigger? I know, for some people, it can be someone touched them in a certain way, or they're in a room that's familiar and their mind will be triggered and recall this memory. Or did you have these moments through therapy and working to uncover these moments to help yourself heal? How was it for you?
I think I knew all along. Like, I don't really know how to explain that. Because I know some people literally block it out, right? I don't think I fully blocked it out. I think I justified it in some way. Of course, as a kid, I had no idea what was happening, right? I remember, like, the first time it happened, we were at this family reunion, and the next few nights, like, it happened that one night, and I remember waking up the next morning and, like, everything was normal, and I'm like, I really didn't know what just happened, right? And that things kept escalating after that, and the next night when I went to sleep, I was concerned. I wasn't sure what to expect. And then it happened again. And so I actually, when he ran away after I pretended like I was waking up, I actually left and I went there was a cabin that the rest of my family was staying in, but all the rooms were full. So I would go the rest of the nights that I was there, like I would go into the bathroom and sleep in the bathroom to avoid it. But then when I was home, I couldn't do that. So I think I knew all along. And I do have this issue where I say it's an issue, like and it started with this, like I have too much compassion for people sometimes. Like I understand wholeheartedly that hurt people. And that's a big part of sexual abuse too. A lot of sexual abusers have been sexually abused. And so I had compassion for him. And like how hurt or how confused must he be to do something like that, right? And so I minimized it, and I made it small. So over time, there was a couple things. What made me recognize that it was big, was that it was actually my current wife, my only wife. So yeah, so she was Taylor. She had been through something really serious as well, and I won't share the details of that because that's her story. But I knew about it, and in my mind, like that was really horrific. And so mine seemed like small potatoes, right? And I tell you these things, I don't know, I feel like what my brother did to me for years and years and years and years isn't small potatoes, right? I see that now. And I remember sharing that with her early on in our friendship and our relationship, and she I remember saying it like, yeah, this little thing happened to me, right? And she was like, Allie, what? Like, no, like that's not even close, because you were never safe. I was never safe. Like I couldn't go to bed and be safe. I couldn't be safe in my own bedroom, couldn't be safe in my own house. And so that was the moment that really hit me, that was something really traumatic that happened to me that I needed to deal with. The next moment was, and I still kind of had that like weird compassion minimalization about it. And then the next moment I was actually working with a therapist, and this wasn't many years ago. I was talking to a therapist, and I always like had trouble with going to bed and waking up in the morning, and going to bed and wait. Like anytime I was like time to get ready for bed, I hated it. I was miserable. And then waking up in the morning, I just felt gross. And I was like, what can I do? Like, why do I feel that way? And she was like, well, I mean, has anything ever happened to you at night, like when you went to bed? And I was like, it took me a second, but I was like, oh. And then came the anger. That's when the anger really came for me. That somebody did something to me that affected me for so many years in such a drastic way. I mean, to literally hate going to bed every night, waking up every morning. That's when I really got angry about it. So there's been stages. There wasn't many people I could talk to. I remember telling my stepmom about it, and like, on the other side of my family. And that was a really healing moment for me, because somebody else was angry. Of course, my wife was angry, but those two moments of my wife and my stepmom being angry about it and hating him and giving me permission to hate him too. and it's okay. Honestly, I'm at a point now where I know that it's okay for me to hate him. If that makes any sense.
I'm glad that you had that person, who has been able to rally against him and rally with you, because that's crucial for this type of healing. And what you said of you were never safe. That's huge, and that like really hit me, because you didn't. It's so different, and the worst part of these statistics, I think, is that it is so alarmingly high that it's someone that you know or a family member, and that is creating that never feeling safe. You can't, sometimes it's happening in your own home, like you, and you go to bed in fear, you wake up in fear, and you don't have those moments of just being a child, and that's
Yeah.
that's awful. No
Yeah.
one should have to go through that.
We talked about this, I think, a while ago, but privately, but one of the best analogies I've heard, this was, I can't remember her full name, it was like Dr. Rhonda something, and she'd written a book around her story, and this analogy that she shared was really impactful for me, because I think, a lot of things that I'll talk about as far as coping and healing, and again, I'm not any kind of doctor expert, this is anecdotal in my experience, but she shared this analogy that hit home for me really hard, and it was when you're sexually assaulted, it's like it's a break-in of your body, and in law enforcement, they there's burglaries and robberies, and there's home invasions, and home invasions are treated differently, because that's when the family is present, that's when the residents of the home are present and somebody breaks in, and typically, majority of the time, the residents of that home leave the home because they're no longer safe in that home. They can't sit in their own house and feel safe ever again. It's just always there, and so they move. But when you're sexually assaulted, it's a home invasion, and you can't move, like you can't leave, but you've left your body. And that resonated with me so much, looking back on, how disconnected I become to my body, because, this analogy she was sharing, it's like, okay, it's like the home is foreclosed on, right? Like all the electricity is turned out, like your spark is gone. You become kind of numb, and like what happens to a home when it's foreclosed on, there's nobody in it, there's no utilities, right? Things start to break down. And so I actually, and this is something that I talked about, I know we've in the past mental health initiative thing where we talked about my chronic illness that I went through. This is something I talked about with my doctors, because they asked about my whole history and like adverse childhood events and things like that. And I firmly believe that me becoming chronically ill, this was a ripple effect, because I was so disconnected. Even at 15, 16 years old, I had like a lot of hip pain. I was going to, therapists and things like that for my hip pain. And they were always like blown away, like, why are your hip flexors so tight? And, I was holding on to all of this in my body, and I didn't even know it. Like I was so disconnected from my body. And so, because I didn't feel safe in my body, right? Like that's how much it affects a human. We have this somatic memory where our body keeps score of all these things. And so minimizing it doesn't do you any good. I think it's not as much what you justify and think about in your brain as listening to your body, I think, is the most important part, or at least it has been for me, of reconnecting and moving back in to my body.
I think that's the perfect analogy, and you said it perfectly. You're trapped. You're trapped in this home that's been invaded, and to work through that and keep the lights on and do all these things, that's work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of healing and effort to be able to do that. Yeah, I'm blown away by your strength and by healing and by talking about this today. So I just want to thank you for that right now, for everything so far, and we're not even done, but I just want to want to pause there to make sure that you know that what you've been saying is huge and it's very impactful, and I'm sorry that you've had to speak about this, but I'm grateful that you're able to make this impact for others, because like these statistics shows, it's happening more than we want to believe. And I think that it's safe and it's easy to pretend that this is not happening around us. It's easier to raise your children thinking that they're going to be happy and healthy and that these things won't happen to them. But the reality is that it could. And as friends and aunts and uncles and parents, it's our duty to make sure that we are educated on this and know what's happened to others, and try to put some steps to prevent this, you know, with our own loved ones. So I'm just so grateful for you for this. I know you mentioned that you went to therapy, and then for your chronic illness, you've had to go through extensive doctor's appointments just for that, which I agree with you. I 100% believe that that stems from sexual assault, because the physical part, that just stress alone can do to your body is huge. And yes, something. But is there anything specific that you can share? All right, let me back up. What was the timeline from after this was happening to where you felt like you needed to seek help, whether it was through therapy or just reading books or opening up to someone else? Was there a big time where you were holding this in to yourself before you reached out to anyone, or how did that work for you?
Yeah, I definitely held it in for a long time, a really long time. And I don't know that there was ever a big moment. I think that's what is interesting about healing in general. I mean, there's been multiple times in my life, like healing from being chronically ill for 2 years, right? That was a lot of grief to deal with and things like that. And it's a process. Like people say a healing process, it is a process. And so something like this, it's the same thing. I think I talked about this last time. And of course, there's a lot of parallels for me as far as healing goes and things like that. But with something like this, as a victim of sexual assault, we're survivors of sexual assault, all these different terms that we come up with and that feel better to us. And of course we need to have that. I definitely align with survivor for sure. Now I think the number one thing for me is like, it's the shame. Shame seems to be the number one thing that I hear and feel and see happening for people, is that when you're sexually assaulted, that's what you feel. You feel shameful and guilty. It's taken me a long time to deal with, and I still deal with it. Like, I mean, even sharing this, like telling you guys something like this, my mind's like, well, why didn't you do anything, Allie? Right? Like, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you call 911? Right? And hypothetically, right? That's what I want people, number one, to see, is that what a home invasion is for those kids out there. We're taught, hey, if somebody breaks in the home, you pick up the phone, you call 911. It's the same thing for your body, right? You got to speak up. So that's number one. But number two is like, even when it happens, there's all kinds of different circumstances. I mean, sexual assault is such a spectrum. It's like, when people think about sexually assault, they might think of, some kind of just really horrific rape. And it's not just that. There's so many things that can happen that can traumatize a human. And the shame is number two, right? So the shame is the big piece of this that I think is hardest for most people. And I believe that that's why it's not talked about. One of two reasons: shame, and what do people think of you then? Will they just see you as this victim, right? Like that. I think that's something people feel. I don't seem to feel that as much anymore as I do the shame of, I don't even want to say allowing it to happen, but that's the thing that I had to deal with the most. And so for me, it's like, that's something that I will have with me for the rest of my life. Like it's a burden, and it will come up in stages. And there's times where I'll feel great about it, but it's always there. And so even in my chronic illness, what I've found to be the most true, because I feel like, 2 years that I was sick was like a pressure cooker of healing, of personal growth and healing. And so what I found that has been the most effective isn't some kind of crazy intervention. It's like the smallest things that add up so big, right? Like, so for me, I don't think I really had any kind of crazy intervention where I really reached out for help a bunch. There was a time when I spoke with a therapist, and the therapist said that if I talked about sexual assault and they felt like this person was still a danger to others, that they would need to report it. So I didn't want to say anything because that's my family. What would that do, right? If I was the person to put my stepbrother in jail, or something to happen to that person. So I didn't really talk about, hey, Taylor, think you can turn off the TV? That's distracting me. I hope that's not distracting anybody else. So as far as like coping mechanisms, it's definitely been a process. And I think especially in the more, Taylor, will you turn it off? Oh, sorry. So sorry, guys. I think more recently is the most healing that I've done. Number one is like when I spoke with Taylor and recognized, when I shared that with Taylor, what she did for me. And I think that's the first thing for anybody to do when they're justifying it and twisting it and minimizing it and feeling that shame, because it seems to be what we do, is talking to yourself like you're your best friend. What would your best friend say about something like that happening to you? Would they say, oh, you were asking for it, or, oh, you shouldn't have been drinking, or, whatever the case was, right? There's so many things that people say that we minimize stuff like that, and it doesn't make it okay. It never makes it okay. It's still, somebody still broke into your house. There was no permission given. So that was a big piece for me to maximize it. I don't know, take it from being so small to actually something that really affected me. And, I've worked on the difference between having compassion. One of my coaches taught me this, like the difference between having compassion and justifying it and giving permission. Like, I'm sorry that whatever you were going through, like, I'm sorry you had that, but that doesn't like screw you, right? That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't give you permission or justify what you did. It doesn't make it okay. I still have to have that boundary. So I want to go back. Tell me your question one more time so I make sure I'm being clear on that. Because I'm kind of going.
I think the process
Yeah.
for healing can be different for everybody. And I know, like you said, you didn't talk about it for a long time. And maybe there's a lot of people who haven't even realized that they have been sexually assaulted for a number of years, because we have these experiences where, especially children, because they're vulnerable and they're not educated, that they're groomed. They have no idea that what is happening to them is a home invasion. They think someone is being invited and their friend.
Yeah.
And so that time period of, when you either realize that what is happening is, this is hurting me, this is not okay, and come to that, kind of clarity, and what the process looked like for you of when you felt safe enough to trust someone with this knowledge, and, kind of the process of whether it was a therapist or a family member or a friend or a loved one, just kind of what your process was for seeking, help on how to heal from this.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think I felt safest, with my wife, right? That was the first time. Obviously, we weren't married at the time. So I had totally frozen. Like, I think as a kid looking back, even now, like when I think about my adolescence, I don't even like thinking about it because how I feel, like it feels gross. Like it doesn't feel fun in any way. Like I just wasn't happy. Like I'm sure I had, happy moments, but like my body wasn't okay. And so when I think about that, I recognize, oh man, like something was really wrong. Something was really off. And so I don't think I ever recognized it when it was happening. I really don't think I did. I was in that freeze state, right? Which is like what your nervous system does to protect you, and your brain does your best to protect you. And so when I told Taylor was really probably the first time that I recognized that it was a big deal. And first there was that shame, right? And so, probably the most impactful thing for me was telling myself, because it's true, I was doing the best that I could at the time. I was absolutely doing the best that I could at the time, like 1000%. I had no idea, right? I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what was happening, and my brain froze. It's what your nervous system does. It's what your brain does. So I was doing the best I could. So I had to forgive myself first. So that was a big step for me. But again, it's a process. So I would say, gosh, over the last several years of really working on this and diving in, it's more so been, I've talked to some coaches and people about it. And to be honest with you, I think there's definitely value in talking about it, for sure. Like, for sure. I think something like this, to speak light onto something like this, because it's just for the greater good, right? The ripple effect of talking about it brings light, so that it's not just okay for people to do that, because, girls feel shame or guys feel shame, and so they don't say anything. Well, then that just opens the door for somebody else to do it, knowing that nobody's going to say anything, right? Just starts this cycle over again. And I think talking about it, of course, talking about it, but here's where I think, in my experience, anecdotally, not a doctor, I believe these traumatic events and things that happen to us are held in our body. Of course, my brain can logically think, yeah, I'm safe. I can say, yeah, I was doing the best that I could. But my body doesn't know that. My body is still running on this old program, right? And so the little things for me are like, to this day, I'll still talk to myself, and I'm speaking to my body. Like, that's the way I see it in my head. I'm saying things like, I approve of myself. I approve myself, or I am safe. And I'll literally, like, I'll speak it actually into my hips, because my hips hold so much pain and tension. I'm speaking, I'm safe, into my hips. I'm connecting back to my body. Like, in the morning when I wake up, I do like a body scan. Like, I just scan through like my toes and my feet and my ankles. It's like these simple things like that of reconnecting to my body that I had moved out of for so many years, right? That I was so disconnected from. So I think that was really the number one thing for me, was connecting, not just what I was thinking, but connecting it to my body, if that makes any sense. Another big one for me, was, okay, if we all like take a big deep breath, like if we go, like our chest and our shoulders and all that rises, right? And I heard this on this podcast one time. And of course, we all talk about like this diaphragmatic breathing, but this hit me so hard. So this guy was like, hey, if we were all on a hike together and we all saw a bear, what would we all do? We'd be like our chest rises up, our shoulders rise up. That is a sympathetic breath, right? That's a fight or flight breath. And so, think about a baby, right? A baby walking around has this big old pot belly, right? They're breathing with their belly, and so that's like the natural parasympathetic rest and digest way of breathing. And so when I heard this, I just started noticing multiple times throughout the day what my belly felt like. And it was always like, like just tense, like kind of sucked in. And I was breathing in my chest. I was breathing shallow. And so just, a few times a day, I'd sit there and I'd let my belly hang and like breathe into my belly, take some diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, where you make your big old pot belly, right? It's like all these little things that got me reconnected to my body to try to rewire this program that had happened, because it had happened so many times, right? I was constantly in this, like, I remember being like that as a kid. I was just like terrified all the time. So those are a lot of the things that, have helped me as far as coping mechanisms, because it's never been for me just a conversation with a therapist that's helped. It's been the little things day in and day out of rewire. Like, I have to break the pattern of when I go to sleep, instead of, I just notice, I start becoming aware of what my body feels like and what my body's telling me. And then I, decide something new, right? And it happens slowly. It doesn't just feel normal again. It just happens slowly of saying, I'm safe, and asking myself how I want to feel and choosing that. And that sounds, I know it's not as simple as I say that, but that's what I worked on over time of when I go to bed. I'm not saying it still doesn't happen, because it does, right? I still have those feelings of that feels icky, but it's a lot easier for me to notice it and shift it now than it ever was. And it's just these little tiny things over time. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that does, and that's great. And you're taking ownership of your body, with these small steps. And I think that's a huge part of this is letting it be yours, because it is your body, your thoughts. No one should have any say, nothing to do with that, without your permission. And so I love that. And I think that that's such a great thing that you've been able to develop. And I think that can be huge for others. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I do want to open this up and see if there's any other questions from anyone here who has anything that they'd like to ask. You can either put that question in the chat box, or you can come off of mute if you'd like to.
Hi, this is Cassie. I just shut my camera off, so hopefully this comes through a little bit clearer with my connectivity issues I'm having tonight. But I know we spoke a little bit, Allie, in our kind of prep meeting about coping mechanisms, and I recall some of the really great coping mechanisms that you mentioned that you used in your lifetime, not just with this particular experience, but just in general. Do you mind touching a little bit on those? Because I know they certainly put some tools in my pocket.
Yeah. Remind me what a couple that you're thinking of to see which track you're going down.
I remember the yell it out method was one of them, and then I know that you've had like I think it was your write it out method where you used to write things down and list things out. But maybe there'll be additional that we didn't discuss, but those are the two that stuck out to me.
That's huge. Like that's actually something, because there's been some things that have come up that have been triggering for me, and that's something to recognize with something like this. Like I had been doing great with all this, and then just recently, actually, I wasn't. And so it's like, we can't just get mad at ourselves again. Like, oh, I'm starting from, square one again. You're not. Like, I promise you're not. It's just like this, it happens in waves, right? You don't ever just start over. You're constantly healing. But yeah, there's, the methods that you're talking about, the anger is, I've never felt anger like what I felt towards something like this. Anger and confusion are like the top two emotions for me, but it's like rage, anger. Like I will have violent thoughts over this. And it'll just like happen when I wake up at times. And it's random, right? But it's like this anger. And so all of it's in your body, right? Like it's all stored, all these emotions are stored in our body. And what we think, and I think this is what happens when these traumatic experiences happen too, but like it's like our brain thinks that when we feel that anger, if we like allow ourselves to start to feel how angry we are, that will stay there forever, when the opposite is true, right? Like it's actually the way to move through it. So we all try to like push those like icky emotions away, of like frustration, anger, those kinds of things, especially the deep ones. But actually feeling it is what is, allows you to get to the other side. So yeah, I mean, definitely I've done, I think I shared this on the last meeting about rage on the page. This was, Gabby Berenstein shares this method where there's literally no method to it. It's just like, I will sit there and cap attack my computer and say whatever I want to say. And there's times when I'll be typing and I can feel my body, like I'm wanting to stop because it's getting too dark. And it's like, those are the moments to just stick with it a little bit more, right? Until I'm comfortable. There's definitely been times where I'm like, okay, you know what? That's enough for today. I'll try again tomorrow, right? To feel whatever's best for me. But there's times when like I can feel that nudge of I just need to go a little bit deeper in the release that I feel. And then one that you mentioned is screaming. And I've done that both with this situation and, when I was sick. But it's like, I actually did it just a few weeks ago. And I did it not even expecting anything. and I'm talking like horror movie scream, like full on, you know, Exorcist style, like just wild, wicked scream. So I screamed once and then I screamed again. And in that next scream, like something happened. Like it's like that version of myself, that 13, 14-year-old, you know, that was just so confused, it was like coming out of me. Like I could feel it leaving me. And then I just sat there with my body and just noticed what was moving through me in that moment. And I feel like those like somatic approaches where we're really using our body, whether it's even stretching, right? Like when I'm stretching and I'm, you know, the pain that I have in my hips and they're tight and all these things, just like leaning into it and listening to my body. But yeah, the releasing the anger, Cassie, that's definitely a big one. There's another thing. I actually did that this weekend, literally this weekend. So literally this weekend, I was struggling with this. It was coming up and I could feel it for a few days before that, where my body was feeling agitated and panicky. And it was like Sunday and I kind of had like a panic episode for no reason that morning. Later that afternoon, I just felt like super floaty. My body was super agitated. And so I laid down on the couch, and this is more of like a more spiritual approach, I guess. But for me, it's what I needed in the moment, where I laid down and I did a lot of those belly breaths. I probably did like 20 or 30 just diaphragmatic breathing, right? Big belly breaths. And just really followed my breath. That's the main thing I do to start with, is just like inhale, exhale, following the breath for a little while. And then I started to allow all those feelings to come up and notice where I'm feeling those emotions in my body, right? Whether it's in my chest, and my chest is tight, I feel in my throat, I feel in my stomach, all this frustration and anger coming up. Because honestly, I probably couldn't have told you, if that feeling would have happened 10 years ago to me, I wouldn't have been able to explain it. But today I know where it comes from, right? Like being able to recognize it and have the awareness around where that emotion is coming from. And so I remember like I gathered up all those emotions, and there were so many times where my body's like, I gotta move, like I gotta get out of this, I can't feel this. But I'm like, there was just something, some kind of nudge, just like, just stick with it just a little bit longer. And you know, whatever anybody believes in, right? If you believe in a higher power, surrendering that anger and that frustration, that rage and that hatred, surrendering it to whatever you believe in. And that's what happened for me. And there was, you know, it was just a powerful experience. Like I literally got up from that. It was like 30, 40 minutes that I did that. And I got up and I felt like 1,000 pounds lighter since. So that, along with screaming, along with rage on the page. And again, you know, this was a big theme in the last meeting that we had, is like, what feels right to you? Like there's all these different coping mechanisms. And I hope if somebody's watching that's dealing with this, maybe you're writing down some of the anecdotes that I've had of what I've shared, of, you know, my healing process. But I think the biggest thing is listening to what your body's telling you and what you might need in this moment. I'll ask myself that all the time. What do I feel like I need right now? If I'm feeling something happening, what do I think I need right now? What do I feel like I need? And you can usually, you know, find it. Did that answer
Thank
your
you so
question?
much, Allie. Yeah, it totally answered it. And I just think that like with, you know, such a specific experience, still having coping mechanisms that are so diversely useful in your life, is just an amazing, you know, strategy. And I appreciate you sharing, because certainly for those of us who may not have experienced this type of situation, we still can learn, not only just from, you know, these warning signs and so on for our loved ones, but we also can take some of this away for ourselves and use them on alternative mental health challenges that we may encounter or have encountered. So I so appreciate those. And I just can't say thank you enough for the experience that you've brought to this initiative and for people to hear about.
Of course, my pleasure. Yeah, I think if you don't mind me sharing just on, you know, other people in your life, or kids or things like that, or one thing that I work on in particular, and so this can be for if somebody has somebody else in their life, I will literally work on going back. I will talk to little Allie. I will write letters to little Allie in that period of time when that happened. I will talk to her like, you know, just speaking life into her, like, you're above and beyond enough, and all kinds of things, right? But especially with that experience of what did she need? What did 11 or 12, 13, 14-year-old girl need when that was happening to her? And leaning and me, I can give that to her now, right? And that's what I need to do, because there's a lot of times like I feel that little Allie coming out, right? Like getting anxious and stressed and angry. But I'll write letters to her. And so if there's somebody, going through it, obviously it's, if it's never happened to you, sometimes you don't know, but I think, it's holding space for that person. It's allowing them to feel safe. It's speaking life into them. And above all else, it's not their fault, right? Like, I think if somebody ever shares a story with you, I can promise you are looking at your face, looking at your reaction to see what you might share with them. Like, and if there's, because I'll look for it, man. Like, I remember doing this when I shared it the first couple times. Like, was I wrong? Like, should I be ashamed? Should I be guilty of this? I'm looking for that in somebody else's reaction, right? This is for me early on, what I felt. So being that person that's like, no, this was not your fault. You did the best that you could, right? This is 1000% not your fault. And helping them believe that and feel that would be what I needed, at that time in my life.
Thank you so much, Allie. Before we go, I do want to be respectful of your time. I know we're towards the end of the meeting. I know that we have a lot of parents who will watch these back, and even if you're not a parent today, you may become one in the future. Would you give any advice or red flags to look for in your children? Did you feel yourself pulling away and getting more distant during that time, feeling like you couldn't open up as much? Or, were there any signs, if you were to look back at your younger self, can you identify anything that you felt like you might have been doing that could cause some alarm or a subtle red flag for a parent to notice?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to look back on for me. My mom has actually shared, this was a process for my mom to process too. But she shared that time in Olive Garden that I vividly remember, she vividly remembers. And she remembers that being a cry for help from me, that I wasn't okay. She knew I was being bullied, but there was something about it that I wasn't okay. And so, when I think there's an aspect of, like we talked about, we're not safe in our body, right? All of a sudden you're not safe. And so that can translate to, we're not feeling okay in social situations, right? Like this anxious kind of attitude. I think you can kind of see by looking at a person by their energy, like if they're feeling at peace or not, right? So I think that anxious energy, but I think, more importantly, what I think about most when I think about talking to my kids about it, or my future kids, is like, kind of like I said earlier, it's, we talk about, I remember my parents saying, here's what we do if there's a fire. Here's what we do if somebody breaks into the house. Here's what we do if, and that's never talked about, right? Like, it's just not talked about. If somebody touches your body, like, what is okay and what's not okay? Because I had no idea. I had no idea what was happening. So I think talking about it is probably, I just believe it's the most powerful thing that we could do with our youth in a way that's safe. I mean, it's crazy some of the things that are being talked about in some schools now, but it's what's okay and what's not okay. And that if something like this happens, you tell somebody, just like you called 911. If somebody breaks into the house, you tell somebody and have a safe space to tell somebody, if that's, the mom, the dad, whatever. I just think it needs to be talked about. But yeah, so some of the warning signs that I mentioned, and then it being talked about too. And of course, talked about in the reverse as well. Not just if somebody does that to you, but for your child that, because this is my brother, right? What if my parents had talked to him about what is okay to do with a girl and what's not okay to do with a girl? Would that have helped? I don't know, but I know it wasn't talked about.
I agree 100%. I think that the generation, my generation and younger, I think that we are getting better. I think we're moving in a better direction.
Yeah.
I know, my parents are phenomenal people, but they also were not ones that talked about this. This was a taboo subject in our home and in really all of my friends' homes, I think. But I appreciate that you're talking about this now, because that's how I raised my kids, and I know a lot of my friends are similar. So I see this movement going that's going to create a
Definitely.
better environment for children. I think, it's baby steps. It's not everyone out there, and there's lots of factors, and there's, a lot of areas that are not getting the education that they need as well, and that's a huge part. But good touch versus bad touch
Mhm.
is huge. And yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. So thank you.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's huge for sure. Yeah, like sex is sacred. Sex is beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful thing that we have this gift, but it's until it's not, right? And so that I know that's something that's difficult for, there's still things for me, even just on light touch that on my arms or something like that still can trigger me a little bit. Like I just feel kind of agitated all of a sudden. So that's something that, to deal with for just another thing that we have to deal with, right? But I will say that for anybody that has been through something like this, it's really the same message for me that I shared with, the last meeting that we were on with my chronic illness. It's choose your experience, right? And for me, it's like, yes, this happened to me. And I just know for me that I want to take full responsibility for everything I can do to heal. And it's not something that'll happen overnight. But if it's a little bit that I can do today and a little bit that I can do tomorrow, even if it's hard for me, I want to do it, It's different for everybody, but we don't have to be a victim. We can be a survivor too.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you talking about this today. And I want to leave things here. Perfect ending. You gave some beautiful advice to anyone who might be struggling with this, or know someone who might be struggling with the recent, situation, or a situation that is being brought up after some time and after some processing. So thank you for coming today, and I hope that anyone who needs to hear this, if you guys are listening and you need any resources, you can contact us. Those numbers, the sexual assault hotline, those are there available day and night. So please take advantage of those, or spread the word if necessary.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allie.
See you guys soon. Bye.